I am presenting Gustave Le Grey, who was known for his technical innovations, his teaching, knowledge of many subjects, and an extraordinary imagination. Born in 1820 outside of Paris as an only child, his middle-class parents hoped he would enter into civil law, but they supported him when he turned to painting and began his studies with Paul Laroche alongside Henri Lesuec and Charles Negre. Delaroche closed his studio in 1843 after hazing death of a student, and Le Grey departed for Italy. Over the next 5 years, he married a working-class girl, had several children, and presumably painted. By 1847, the family was back in Paris, and he enrolled again as a Delaroche student at the Louvre. While his painting endeavors flagged, Le Grey began to experiment with daguerreotype plates. Few daguerreotypes by Le Grey remain, as his focus quickly shifted to collodion prints on paper. He suffered the loss of 2 children to the cholera epidemic and moved his family to the outskirts of Paris. Le Grey shared his process freely and began to take on students. Starting in 1849 through 1857, Le Grey gained recognition for his studies and photographs of the forest of Fontainebleau. In this photograph, Le Grey focused on the small bush rising from the tree and pointed his camera to the light, emphasizing the light and shadow. During this time, Le Grey had been experimenting with the wax paper process. Le Grey made significant improvements by using a 2-tiered process, treating the paper with wax prior to exposure, which improved the paper's transparency and offered greater detail than the collotype process. This photo of oak tree and rocks clearly shows Le Grey's background as a painter, with its soft light, texture, and atmosphere, along with detail represented by the patterns and merging of the tree, rock, and foreground. This photograph, Baspero, is from a wax paper negative. Le Grey applied for a patent for his process in December 1851. Le Grey composed this photo by placing his camera in the middle of the path so the eye is drawn towards the clearing and light. The golden hue is characteristic of his prints during this time. The wax paper allows the detail of the foliage while allowing a hint of a blur. Portraiture, a source of income for many artists, wasn't an interest of Le Grey's. He produced beautiful portraits when he chose to, but overall felt they were best painted. This photograph later led to a commission from Napoleon to document a summer training camp at Chalon. Le Grey likely sold his work on consignment through print merchants. Additional commissions supplemented his income. This slide and the following were commissioned by the Mission Heliographiques during the summer of 1851 to document French landmarks. Le Grey traveled with a former student, Auguste Mistral. The ramparts of Gascogne from the 13th century captured a site of historical import, as well as the light and shadow on the geometric surfaces. This photograph of the heavy 12th century portal is lightened by the subtle sun on the frame, while the interior remains dark and mysterious. Unfortunately, few prints remain from Le Grey's travels during this time. Le Grey was fascinated by the sea, and his photographs of seascapes were widely distributed. The Brig on Water in 1856 was his first and most famous. It was extraordinarily difficult to capture both the sea and clouds. This image, from one negative, used the reflection of the sea rather than the land, and exposing it for the sky gave the image the appearance of twilight. This dramatic photograph from 1857 was made from 2 exposures, one for the sea and the other for the sky, which were printed on a single paper and then combined together. Le Grey was masterful at joining the 2 images together. These images were among the first known combination prints. The Great Wave taken off the coast of Normandy is another example of Le Grey's combination techniques. It seemed that Le Grey had found the way to maintain his creativity as well as a viable commercial product. While Le Grey was working on his seascape, he received, it is believed, a special unidentified commission for 3 nudes. The images certainly weren't for commercial distribution, as the censors would not have allowed it. The same model appeared in the three known images, and it is possible that Le Grey simply wanted to explore the genre. In any event, it is an anomaly and may simply indicate that Le Grey was willing to take on various requests. In 1857, Le Grey was commissioned by Emperor Napoleon III to document a summer training camp in Chalon. This included numerous portraits of officers, which were incorporated into ornate albums as gifts from the emperor. After several months, this was followed by travels along with the court to Cherbourg. Here Le Grey photographed the French and English fleets. The warships' small scale makes them look like toys. Le Grey continued his work in Paris, but his personal life was crumbling. His marriage, in spite of many children, had not been happy. He was in debt, having overextended himself on a lavish studio, and his benefactors were abandoning him. And so Le Grey fled, deserting his wife and children, never to return. Le Grey set sail with Alexandre Dumas on his schooner, the Emma. Dumas wanted Le Grey to photograph the ancient civilizations of the East for a great book. En route, they detoured to Palermo, where Le Grey photographed the new ruins. This portrait of the revolutionary Garibaldi was frequently reproduced. Shortly thereafter, a conflict ensued, which likely involved a woman. Le Grey with two others were abandoned by Dumas on the island of Malta. Possibly Le Grey only intended to be away a few months with Dumas, but on leaving the island of Malta, he landed in Cairo, where he set up a studio and accepted commissions from the Pasha of Egypt. The photograph with the soldier and camel in 1866 may have been one of his first. It is a staged and theatrical photograph. Le Grey continued tutoring and teaching through 1872. Outside of Egypt, his work went unrecognized. There are few details of his life after 1872. It is known that he was still hounded by creditors. Though he had left his family behind, the legality did not. When he wished to remarry a 19-year-old woman who had his child, the marriage was refused, as he was unable to show proof of his first wife's death, who had disappeared. Le Grey died in 1884 in virtual poverty.